Everybody, it's Jason with Parallel Reality coming back with you here today, and I can't even talk already at the first 3 seconds of the video, but with a double dose of articles. It's the also rare double article video from me here, but they do have something to do with each other, and they're both from Outkick about pretty much the same thing. We have one from July 15th, one from July 14th, and it's about the All-Star Game, the baseball, Major League Baseball All-Star Game in Atlanta, and I was about to say Florida. I don't know why. It was clearly in Atlanta, but the reason I wanted to do this this video, this article, is because a couple of years ago, one of the first videos I did on my channel was about like why I didn't watch sports anymore, and specifically about baseball. It had to do with what happened a few years ago with the All-Star Game, which is what we're going to go into in this article, and it does have to do with the other article up here as well. So we'll get into it. I'm not going to give a summary at first about what happened. These articles definitely go into it. I have read both of them at this point, but we'll start with this one. It says MLB owes Atlanta, Georgia an apology. It says before the start of the All-Star Game in Atlanta on Tuesday night, MLB owes the state of Georgia an apology. And like I said, part of the reason, or a big reason, not a part of the reason, it was the reason why I stopped watching baseball was because of what happened, and we're about to see what that was. Back in 2021, it says before the start of the All-Star Game in Atlanta on Tuesday night, MLB owes Georgia an apology. It says for background, Atlanta was supposed to host the event in 2021, but the league relocated it to Denver, Colorado after then President Joe Biden denounced the new Georgia Voting Act as racist. It says this is Jim Crow in the 21st century. It must end, Biden said in the statement at the time, claiming the new restrictions disproportionately targeted black voters. This MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred claimed the law restricted voters in his statement addressing the relocation. And I'm not going to go into what the law says because I see a little bit down below. It's going to actually tell you what happened. And you're probably thinking, if you don't know, like, oh my God, what did Georgia do? And understand it was pure propaganda from the Democrats. Okay. It says, I have decided that the best way to demonstrate our values as a sport is by relocating this year's All-Star Game and MLB draft, Manfred said. Major League Baseball fundamentally supports voting rights for all Americans and opposes restrictions to the ballot box. By the way, there weren't any, but you'll find that out soon. As in 2020, MLB became the first professional sports league to join the Nonpartisan Civic Alliance to help build a future in which everyone participates in shaping the United States. I don't know what the Civic Alliance is, but I would guarantee it's probably not good. It says now for some actual facts. So you're about to find out what this horrible voting law was. It says there was nothing ever Jim Crow about requiring a photo or state-issued ID to vote by absentee ballot, the main point of emphasis MLB took with the Election Integrity Act of 2021. Yeah, that's it. That's what their racist voting law was, that you need a photo or state-issued ID to vote by absentee ballot. The end. That was the problem. So it says the voting law didn't suppress voters either. During the 2022 midterms, Georgia saw record voting turnout, including among black voters. The state outpaced its 2018 midterms by more than 50%, and Georgia set a record for voter turnout in 2024. And not only what you're seeing here, but they did a poll. I remember seeing this after they specifically asking African Americans about, did they have any problems voting after this particular election? And it came back that it was zero. None of them. It was literally zero had a problem. Okay, nobody did. So that again, this is what MLB decided to punish Atlanta doing was moving the All-Star Game based on basically bullshit. So keeping going on, says, but Jim Crow in the 21st century, am I right? Or Jim Eagle, as Biden later recalled the Voting Act. And that was just a bad joke. And skipping down past Sage Steele's tweet here, because we've gone over what she was quote tweeting, says, moreover, the people who suffered from the most relocation were the Atlanta-based business owners, 30% of whom were black. Yeah, and that was the critique of this move at the time, was that you're hurting a predominantly black city. I mean, that just is business owners, but Atlanta, I think, is half black. Oh, it's actually, the stat is down here in the next sentence, 51% black, okay? And you're going to see here, it says the population in Denver is just 8.8%. So yeah, like this sentence says, that they moved their All-Star Game from a majority black town to a majority white town, and they're saying it was in support of black Americans. Like, that just fundamentally doesn't make any sense. So skipping past that sentence because I just covered what it said, so it says got all that. It says if not, it gets better. It says voting laws in Colorado are more stringent than those in Georgia. says, so what exactly did MLB accomplish by relocating the game 4 years ago? Put simply, it didn't accomplish anything. The relocation proved to be nothing more than a pitiful attempt to acquiesce to uninformed, pandering sports writers who pressured the league to take a stance against Republican legislation. And it says, like this mask-wearing journalist below, and that is where the other article up top here is going to come in, but we'll skip past that for now because you will see, because we're almost done with this one. So as the author says that he discussed with Fox News with Will Cain on Tuesday afternoon, MLB ultimately participated in a smear campaign against Georgia by spreading the same baseless, politically motivated propaganda as Joe Biden and other members of the Democratic Party. As the party, league, and journalists defamed the state by falsely comparing its legislation to laws that willfully enforce racial segregation, and it was all a lie. And, of course, he says again that the state, MLB owes the state, its citizens, and business owners an apology, which I would agree with 100%. And like I said already a couple of times that as I go over to the next article so you can see what the idiot reporter was saying, that I stopped watching baseball. I missed the entirety of 2021, 2, and 3 because of this exact thing. Because I was like, the politics need to get out of sports. It's why I stopped watching football, not the other sports, because I did watch hockey and basketball too. That has nothing to do with politics at all. Just stopped watching them, just one of those things where just, you kind of lose track of it and then that's it. But football and baseball were specifically the two sports that I stopped watching because of politically motivated stuff. And I haven't watched football since 2017. I haven't really kept up with it. Hope the Bears win. I'm a Chicago sports fan. Hope the Bears win. If they do, great, but I'm not going to celebrate or anything. It's just going to be like, all right, good. Happy for them. Happy for the city. But coming around to this is the article. This one actually came before the first one, but I thought it was more pertinent to go over the other one first because I agree with that a lot, that MLB owes Atlanta an apology. So this article here, though, says, mask-wearing liberal reporter asks MLB All-Star manager Dave Roberts about Georgia voting laws. So this is what they wanted to bring up 4 years after it happened, and you're going to find out right now that this reporter is just a moron, to put it mildly. Okay, that's someone that clearly has not researched what she's supposedly reporting on. This is a screen cap, like Pat McAfee looking at her like, what the actual F are you talking about? And this is Dave Roberts, the manager of the Los Angeles Dodgers. This was Paul Skeens. He was the starting pitcher in the All-Star game from the Pirates. And he's only like 22 years old. He's a kid. And Dave Roberts is cool. I liked him as a player. And as a manager, obviously he's been doing really well for the Dodgers, but let's go into this because there is a reason why Dave Roberts' name keeps coming up. It says Major League Baseball took its All-Star game out of Atlanta in 2021 thanks to pressure from radical left-wingers who claimed that a new Georgia voting law was akin to Jim Crow 2.0. It says, of course, officials eventually reversed that decision and re-awarded the game to the city this year. So that's why Atlanta got the game this year. Normally, you do not see a city getting all-star games that close together, or, like they would have in 2021 and then 2025. But this is kind of like, oops, we made a boo-boo, so we're giving it back to you. So it says a radical left-wing journalist who appeared to be donning a face mask in 2025. So you know where this is going. You see someone in a face mask, and you already automatically know their politics. Says, decided to ask NL All-Star Game manager Dave Roberts about the league's decision to hold the 2025 edition of Atlanta, even though the law is still on the books. So right off the bat, you know that this woman did not, because it is a woman, she did not do any research into the law at all. Says, to hammer home the point, the reporter resurfaced the comment Roberts made in 2021, and this is why Dave Roberts, there in full uniform in that picture, is a prominent figure in this particular part of this video. It says, I think it's just being relentless with our voices, the Dodgers manager said at the time. This is not just something that's an isolated moment in time that we're talking about. It's something that needs to be talked about on an ongoing basis and be relentless with it. Okay. So it says the problem is that quote came from a Stop Asian Hate event, and Roberts was talking about attacks on Asian Americans. And I didn't know this part until I read it. It says Roberts, whose mother is Japanese, spoke passionately about the topic. I didn't know he was part Japanese. I just thought he was black, and that's fine. I just had no idea he was Japanese. So it says, I was thinking Dave Roberts, this journalist is conflating two things, which again, leftists, that's what they do. It's kind of impossible for them to tell the truth about anything. It says, it's unclear why this reporter chose to use this comment, which had nothing to do with the Georgia voting law, to frame her question. A quick a quick Google search would have provided her with a much better Roberts quote that actually pertained to the issue at hand. Also in 2021, Roberts said he would consider declining to manage the National League in the All-Star Game if the event remained in Atlanta, and added, when you're trying to restrict African-American votes, American citizens, that's alarming to me to hear, which, as we already have discussed, that is not what the law was at all. Because once the MLB decided to move the All-Star Game out of Atlanta, Roberts said he supported the decision. So yeah, that would be a much more pertinent quote, but maybe Dave Roberts has since read about what it actually was and realized, oh wait, it wasn't what anybody said, which is why he's managing the game now. So surely a good reporter would have used that a quote that actually matched the issue at hand, but that's the state of journalism nowadays, so this isn't surprising. And this section is entitled, Can You Repeat the Question? Yes, because Pat McAfee was like, again, what the actual F are you asking right now? Says, unfortunately, Roberts couldn't hear what the reporter said, probably because it was hard to hear her from behind that COVID-era mask, and asked ESPN's Pat McAfee, who was hosting the event, to sum that up for him. Instead, McAfee asked her to repeat the question. She did, and then decided to throw in a line at the end again. Was apropos of nothing. Says it's a dangerous situation to be a journalist in Atlanta because Atlanta has detained the most journalists by ICE, she said, which I'm just going to press X to doubt on that. So it says technically this is correct. It says ICE detained one journalist, who the Department of Homeland Security said is in the country illegally during a No Kings protest last month. So she is being intentionally deceitful, which again, she's a leftist, so that's just what they do. So it's like you'd think, like, just based on that, you'd be like, oh my god, how many journalists is ICE detained? It turns out it's one, and he was an illegal. I don't even know if it's a he. Now that I think about it, that they were in the country illegally. I don't know if it's he or she. Says yes, Atlanta has had one journalist detained by ICE, and the rest of the country has had zero. So technically, she got that fact right, yeah, by default. Says what that has to do with anything is another matter, but you'll have to ask her. And then the DHS pops in here and says it was a Salvadorian national is in ICE custody because he's in our country illegally. So there you go. And then it says he was arrested for obstruction and after he refused to comply with local police orders to move out of the middle of the street. Well, sorry, you effed around and now you're finding out. It says McAfee and Roberts both gave mundane answers, saying that they were happy to be in Atlanta, happy to be at the All-Star Game, and that those questions are better left to people in charge at Major League Baseball, who ultimately make the decisions about the location of the All-Star Game. And yeah, it's a mundane answer, but you know what? It's fine. It says tough question about Georgia's voting law. It says awful announcing, which has really been living up to its name recently. Yeah, they're kind of all over the place. Decided to frame it as a tough question about Georgia's disenfranchising voting law. So they also don't know anything about the voting law. Then it's basically what this embedded tweet says here. They went full company men with that's the tough question. And then someone pops in here as Mike Bell 929 says, when did awful announcing become MSNBC? Says the bill expanded early voting in most of the state and required ID for in-person or mail-in voting, because how else to defend against voter fraud without valid ID, right? That's a perfect answer. So it turns out the reporter in question is someone named Jen Ramos Eisen, who apparently writes for some website called Defector, which posted an article last week titled How Trans Prisoners Are Dealing with the Trump Administration's Attacks. I don't know what attack she's referring to, and she probably just, being leftist, they just made shit up. It says Eisen also writes and copy edits for another website called The Objective, which calls itself a nonprofit newsroom examining systems of power and inequality in journalism, how newsrooms treat their employees, how journalists interact with their community, and what new forms of journalism can look like. We are written by and for those underrepresented in journalism. So you know exactly what her politics are now, far left. Okay? It says Eisen wrote a piece for the site in 2021 called Journalism is Ableist Down to Its Language. So she's using all of the leftist language that she possibly can. It says, as of this publication, she hasn't written an article about the question she posed to Roberts, which seems odd. Perhaps because the story was never about what Roberts had to say, but was rather about her asking in the first place. Yeah, she just wanted to get her name out there. So this section says it's not the question, it's how it was asked. You might expect me, the author, not me, Jason, to rip Eisen for asking that question in the first place. I'm not going to do that. Certainly, I've been the subject of people saying that I asked inappropriate questions at inappropriate times, like when I asked Dawn Staley during the 2024 Women's Final Four about men competing in women's sports. I actually remember that. That's not pertinent to this, so we'll just move on to the next paragraph. But I do remember that. It says, I don't have a problem with Eisen broaching the subject. True, yeah, it's just a question. MLB made a ridiculous decision to move the All-Star Game in 2021, and it should have to explain that it kowtowed to radical leftists rather than tell them to pound sand. It was a spineless decision then, and moving the game back to Atlanta was the right call. All that is correct. It says, what I do have a problem with is how the question was asked. As mentioned, Eisen used a Roberts quote that was completely out of context to ask her a question. That's not journalism. In addition, Eisen asked a loaded question by referring to the law as a voter suppression law and by choosing to quote former President Joe Biden, a radical Democrat. To present the opposing view, here's what United States Senator Roger Wicker, Republican of Mississippi, wrote about the law. Quote, Georgia lawmakers crafted their new election law to address confusion and controversy around the 2020 election. Their reforms, enacted last year in the Election Integrity Act, were designed to make it easier to vote and harder to cheat, end quote. So to prove his point, Wicker noted that Georgia saw record voter turnout during the 2022 primaries after the law went into effect. In addition, early voting, particularly by African Americans, soared following the law's enactment. Georgia also had a record turnout for the 2024 presidential election. This is not exactly Jim Crow 2.0, was it? But that hasn't stopped journalists like Eisen from peddling a false narrative. Since finally, the idea that Eisen is in a dangerous situation by being a journalist in Atlanta is patently absurd, which is 100% correct. So, journalists, if you're feeling danger, maybe just tell the truth. It's not really a difficult thing to do, but you just can't do that. And that's why people have a problem with you and people keep challenging you, and now you think you're in danger because you're stupid. As yes, one illegal immigrant who happens to be a journalist was detained by ICE and is potentially facing deportation. Here's a tip for all the people worried about ICE detaining and deporting them. Don't enter the United States illegally. Problem solved. There you go. Helpful tips from Outkick. Next section says, mask-wearing liberal reporter takes to blue sky for victory lap. Yeah, when I read this, I was like, come on. But yeah, of course she's got to run to her echo chamber to be like, look at me. Then everybody's going to validate her, and that's basically what happened. It says, after all was said and done, Eisen took to social media to proudly proclaim herself as the one who asked Roberts the tough question. She made one post on X, where I then discovered she had blocked me. This doubling down on her use of a Roberts quote that had nothing to do with Georgia's voting law was certainly a choice. But it was on Blue Sky, the liberal echo chamber social media site, where Eisen really let loose. She said, I have a background in hard news and investigative journalism. I ain't effing around here, and I never will, she said in one post. Yeah, you're so good at journalism, you asked him, you brought up a quote of his that had nothing to do with the actual question. So good job, lady. So it sure sounds like someone with a background in hard news and investigative journalism, huh? Obviously, time spent working for Defector and The Objective qualifies as hard news these days. She wasn't done, though. Says, I will never stop being a punk. I'll be here all week. There should have been a period there between punk and I'll. Says Ramos said, with a picture of herself in what appeared to be, shall we say, questionable attire for a professional setting. And I'm not going to click on it. Says also she wasn't wearing her mask in the photo, so she might only need it when she's about to make herself the center of attention. Yeah, she wants to. That's exactly why she's doing it. Because people are probably looking at her going, why the hell are you wearing that? So she added in another, wow, holy shit, my mentions, and in yet another patted herself on the back for asking real questions at a press conference. It wasn't. You lied. And you were called out on it. Because now it might seem like I'm taking it personally that she blocked me on X, but I bring that up for a very specific reason. Remember, this is someone who's calling herself a journalist and talking about her hard news and investigative journalism background. I have never once engaged with her on social media. I didn't even know this woman existed until Monday like the rest of the world, so why did she block me? Well, there's a pretty easy answer there. She disagrees with my point of view, and that's okay. I'm all for agreement, or disagreement. All agreement too. But not to pat myself on the back, I've reported on some pretty big stories. Seems like someone who calls herself a journalist might want to see what the other side thinks about important issues. For example, I frequently read the New York Times, the Washington Post, and others. I don't block their reporters on social media because I might disagree with them politically. My goal is to gather as much information as possible from as many sources as possible. That's journalism. I don't know what Jen Ramos Eisen is doing, but I know it isn't journalism. She had every right to ask about the All-Star Game being moved by MLB in 2021 and then returned to Atlanta in 2025. Unfortunately, she probably should have done a little more homework, asked a balanced question, and gotten out of the way so that people answering would be the story. But Eisen clearly set out to make herself the story. Mission accomplished. It's just sad that she decided to skew all journalistic ethics to do it. So, yeah, what do you think about this? I'm sorry if there's a little bit of a gap there at the very end. My cord to my microphone had come out, yet it somehow kept recording. I don't know how that worked. It wasn't even plugged in, but it recorded the entire video. But anyway, enough about me. Let me know what you think about this in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.